My opinion on protesting has changed. Unlike most people, I embrace change, and I quite enjoy it when I have a change of heart about something. Some people just like to double down and just remain in the same place for the rest of their life out of some weird stubbornness, I don't know, fear of growth or fear of looking silly in the future when people look back and go, well, you said this. Well, I said many things that have changed my mind about. I'll change my mind about something once I finish doing this. And that's up to me, isn't it, really? You see, for the longest time, I considered protesting to be kind of LARPing. Back in the day, there was just more risk. Protesting was something that involved some sort of danger. Back in the day, you'd have to go toe-to-toe with the establishment, and not everyone would be on your side, and you'd be victimized and called names, and it was always right rotten business. But these days, in the last few years, protests have become something of just a silly parade. You looked at the protests against people like Donald Trump when he came to the UK, and you looked at that procession of sparkly outfits and silly hats and babies and prams, and just looked at it and thought, well, there's not much danger going on here. It didn't really resemble a protest. It more resembled the queue for, I don't know, Mardi Gras or Burning Man Festival or Shambhala. However, in recent times, protesting has changed. It has changed. And recent protests have done what they're supposed to do. And that's the Canadian protests. The truckers. Honk honk, which apparently means Heil Hitler, according to some lunatics out there. Well, good for you. Obviously, 2020 had a lot of protesting going on, but some protests were considered good and some protests were considered bad. That's very representative of just the simplistic nature of our current cultural landscape, isn't it? Good guys and bad guys. And the thing is with those protests, despite many cities being set on fire day after day, the condemnation against it only came from one side, and basically the narrative was, well, these are the cause is good and therefore it's okay, whereas other protests were apparently being done by just lunatics whose disagreement with what the government were doing were completely misguided and out of order because the government were doing it for your own good. Well, now we know that's a load of bollocks. Hindsight. Don't you just love hindsight? I poop on that parade. Yes, that's right. And I'm going to poop on some more parades. The thing is with the protests and the peaceful riots of fire, nothing really changed. That's kind of been my point of protest. Nothing ever really changes. So some guy got thrown under the bus and sentenced to jail for a very long time. They had one fall guy. They defunded the police in loads of different places and then completely changed their mind once they realized that they needed the police to protect them from the people who now really hated them. But nothing changed. I mean, it didn't do any good. It didn't change anything. It didn't change any laws. Racism didn't end overnight. Whether it's to do with racism or not, that's a completely different debate altogether. But nothing. It was just sort of, people throwing out statements going, no, we won't tolerate that. And that was kind of it. After the verdict was delivered for Derek Chauvin, nothing really happened. And the world looked at it and just went, oh, don't fancy going to America anytime soon. But my mind has changed after the protests in Canada. Because if you look back to the 60s, okay, and the civil rights protests, this is something that utilized modern media, at the time, the modern media of the time, very well, because here was some very peaceful marches. They were just marches, okay, and they were peacefully marching, all dressed to the nines, okay, just saying, hey, we just want to have the same rights as other people. It was completely reasonable. Their demands were totally reasonable, and they just walked along, and then the whole world got to see fire hoses being put on them, dogs being set on them, them being beaten with billy clubs in the streets, and the whole world just went, oh, That's not very nice, is it? Even racists were like, oh, what are you doing that for? You bunch of buggers. The spotlight being shone onto what's going on with the Canadian truckers, for me, was huge. And lots of people were paying attention and going, oh, what are they doing that for? Because the thing is with the narrative, everyone likes that word, don't they? The narrative, oh, it doesn't suit the narrative. Like, well, I can't think of any other words. The problem with the narrative in regards to vaccine mandates is just it's completely played out. There was a case for it, but then Saint Omicron came on the scene, didn't it? Saint Omicron, and it is the patron saint of vaccinations, because nothing did more wonders for vaccinations than Omicron, because Omicron is a brilliant vaccine itself. So it was like, but the thing is, before it was like, oh, well, yeah, but you're more likely to spread it onto other people. And now it's like, yeah, it doesn't make any difference. So it doesn't make any difference. So there was no point in these mandates. And regardless of what you think about vaccination status or whatever, the argument for disintegrated after Omicron came along. And yet, these people who are in power, the establishment, the establishment, don't you hate them, wouldn't back down. They just doubled down. Like, no, we have to because, there's no reason for it. There's so many things still going on in the world where there is absolutely no reason for it. It is just pure retardation. There are still countries that force you into quarantine if you're unvaccinated, even though it makes zero difference. In fact, any sort of regulations on having PCR tests when you go into a new country are completely stupid. And they are stupid because have they stopped the spread at any point in time? No. So what good are they? If they actually worked, then maybe it would be a good idea. Even lockdowns don't work. Nothing works. So why are you doing it? Is it because money? Oh, it's probably money. Is it control and power? Yeah. It is retarded. And it's about time, everyone. And everyone stood up and said, no. That is the word that we need to say more often. No. No. And the obscene behavior of the Canadian government during this time was on full display. Here is a Western democracy acting appallingly, freezing people's bank accounts, labeling its citizens who just want the same rights as everyone else as Nazis. And you can fill in the blanks of all the terms that they use against people these days. It's perfectly fine. And the unfortunate thing with the media narrative is that, especially once a juicy war comes along, no one wants to talk about anything else. And that's where we are right now, which is very unfortunate timing. Obviously, it's a sigh of relief for people like Justin Trudeau that the whole world isn't looking at them going, what the fuck are you doing? And obviously Justin Trudeau did wonders for Australia and New Zealand, because before then we were all looking at them going, what the fuck are you doing? So, swings and roundabouts for everybody, isn't it? The gift and the curse, blah, 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 blah. But it is unfortunate. And it's unfortunate that we can only have one narrative going on at one time. One news cycle dominates everything else. Whether it was Trump, whether it was Brexit, whether it was COVID-19, now it's Ukraine. This is, again, another narrative that's just, good guys and bad guys. It's like, really? Has no one learned anything? But it is unfortunate that the spotlight has moved from there. And the problem is a lot of people get bent out of shape and lose their marbles over this kind of thing, because they're like, well, no one's talking about COVID-19. They're like, well, I knew it didn't exist. They do still exist. It's just once people stop talking about it all the time, it just seems like it doesn't exist. It still exists. There it is in my throat. It does still exist. But unfortunately, that's just the way the media works. I mean, you can look at it from a different perspective, from the fact that back in 2014, all this shit between Russia and Ukraine really kicked off. That went away after a few months. And I remember a few years ago going, is that still going on? What's going on with Ukraine? Because I never remember it, the shit with Crimea and the eastern regions that have got these Russian-backed malicious. I mean, who knows? Like, and I was like, has this ended? Is this still going on? And it was still going on when I looked a few years ago, and now suddenly here it is back again. It never went away. It's been going on. Just now, it's just got more interesting. If it happened a year ago, maybe it wouldn't have been that interesting, because COVID was still very interesting, but COVID doesn't get the clicks no more. And the reason I'm talking about all this and going around there is that we are constantly pumped full of narratives, and we're forced to talk about one thing. We're forced to only talk about one thing. Like, so many people will be talking about Ukraine who make content online or even in their tweets or whatever, because it's what's relevant. And what's relevant is still dictated to us. Even if you are an independent creator and an independent journalist or whatever it is, you're still dictated to by the media masters, the masters who control most of the mainstream media. You are still being dictated to rather than you dictating what we talk about. And that's got to stop, because we shouldn't stop talking about what's going on in Canada or anywhere else. And that's why I think it's important to keep spreading the message, because the spotlight of the world was on a Western democracy acting like an authoritarian non-democracy. What's that? Dictatorship? Yeah, that's the one. And now they're all looking at Russia going, oh, look at Russia, a bunch of buggers. Oh, they're an authoritarian state. They imprison their own people and beat them in the streets. Excuse me? There was a bunch of truckers having barbecues, honking horns, who got labelled Nazis. Vladimir Putin says he's invading Ukraine because there's Nazis there. Now, I did actually check. There are Nazis there. There's two very prominent far-right groups who are very anti-Russian because they're very nationalistic, who also apparently helped them form the new government and get rid of the so-called Russian, the Russian-friendly leader from before. Yeah, they're there, but obviously, they're fighting on the right side, apparently. So these are, good Nazis? There's actual Nazis there. That's bizarre, isn't it? And yet there's not actual Nazis protesting in Canada. But apparently they're more Nazi. They're bigger Nazis. They're real Nazis, because we label them as Nazis, even though the ones in Ukraine who go, yeah, we're Nazis, mate. And they're like this, saluting like this. They're Nazis. But, what do I know, apart from the stuff that I read that's true? Fact check that, bitch. And this is where we're at. So I know I've kind of rambled on for a bit, but I just felt I needed to say this, because we need to keep, it's up to us. We can decide what trends, because when you make stuff trend, it means you're talking about it and you're getting more people to talk about it. Instead of letting the trend dictate us, we must dictate the trend. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's why I've made this video. So go out of your way. It's up to you. Everyone's got to do their bit. Go out of your way and make sure you know what exactly is going on in Canada right now, and and how this is progressing. What's being done to those people, to those poor people. Your heart can belong in many places. You don't have to just be concerned about children in Ukraine. Okay, you can be concerned about children in Yemen. Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. No one gives a fuck about Yemen. Well, maybe it's time you gave a fuck about Yemen. Maybe it's time we gave a fuck about the Western world's decline and put a stop to trying to put the brake on a little bit and go, yeah, some of these Western leaders are really making us look fucking stupid. Because who the hell are we to go shouting at other nations like Russia and take away all their rights take away Russians' rights for buying stuff. They can't even buy stuff because your government's a bugger. Well, Justin Trudeau's a bloody bugger. Do you know what I'm saying? We can't go wagging our fingers at them when we've got this own bullshit on our bullshit. Yeah, it's a ship full of bulls. When we've got this old bullshit on our own doorstep, a Commonwealth country behaving like a Russian dictatorship. It's a fucking disgrace. Another thing is that we've got this dangerous precedent of just being okay with companies banning one nationality from doing anything, which is insanity to me. Visa, MasterCard, saying, no, Russians can't use any of our services. Banning Russia Today off of YouTube. Banning Russian accounts on Twitter. I mean, Jesus Christ. This is not on at all. Not on in the slightest. But it's justified, and we cannot allow this kind of thing to be justified. The same way they treated the truckers, you might think that's really out of order, but then you might applaud what's been done to the Russian people. No. Have you not realized how this works yet? That is not good, and you need to be consistent about what you call out as not good. Doing the good and right thing doesn't necessarily make you Mr. Popular, all right? You shouldn't give a shit about being popular. Do you know why? Because popular people are supported by most people. And most people are douchebags. Well, they are, aren't they? I mean, come on, Jesus Christ. All right, well, most people are just completely misinformed. And now misinformation, the spread of misinformation about certain things is going to be a prison sentence? Eat a dick? Are you kidding me? When we reach this stage where misinformation is only allowed to be spread by supposed, let's do air quotes like twats, by supposed reliable, authentic, whatever, reliable, legitimate sources. Yes, like the Chinese government, the Russian government, the Ukrainian government. When they're the only ones who are allowed to spread misinformation and you get banged up in a prison cell, well, you know that's a problem. So, please keep spreading the news about the truckers, all right? There's plenty of room for plenty of news, okay? Because what's going on in Ukraine, you don't even know. You don't even know what a Ukrainian is. Most people don't have a clue about Ukraine. Most people think it's probably a region of Russia. And just go, what? Russia's invading Russia? Seriously. No one knew about Ukraine until, was it Dynamo Kiev reached the Champions League semi-finals with Shevchenko up front. I never heard of Ukraine before until then. I was like, whoa, these Russians are pretty good at football. They're not Russians. Well, what are they then? The Ukrainians. Well, what's a Ukrainian? I've even been to Ukraine. I still don't have a fucking clue about it. So come on. Make the narrative our own to dictate. Let's dictate the narrative and not be dictated by it. Thank you very much.